Chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS, also known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, or simply ME, is a complex and debilitating condition. Now imagine for months on end feeling completely exhausted with absolutely no energy whatsoever to do even mundane things such as getting up from bed to make yourself a cup of tea. Now, how much do we know about this condition? How is it diagnosed? Who's at risk of getting it? Is it curable? The 12th of May was World Chronic Fatigue and Immune Dysfunction Syndrome Day. So today we discuss chronic fatigue syndrome. And to help us answer all these questions and know more about CFS is a guest panel comprised of a neurologist, a sleep therapist from the Donald Gordon Medical Center, a sufferer of ME/CFS, and a representative from the ME/CFS Foundation of South Africa. We also have a homeopath joining us in our studio in Cape Town. Please tweet us at SABC Health Talk or simply interact with us on our Facebook page, SABC Health Talk. Sit back, relax, and learn from this exciting show, coming to you just after a short break. I'm Dr. Saloma Daung, and this is Health Talk.
To be African is beautiful. To be African is a privilege.
It represents hard work. It represents being able to stand on your own.
And respecting other cultures as well.
It's about promoting African heritage.
We are all Africans. Let's come together so that we can have a formidable force.
Our cultures interlink with one another.
And by standing together and embracing one another, you know, there's power in unity.
It is time to cut off this issue of xenophobia.
I stand for African unity. I stand for promoting unity in Africa because
there are many opportunities
to be whatever you want to be.
Africa is one of the most important continents.
Because if we can come together as one, we will be able to actually build a better Africa, the new Africa for the future.
And if we unite our hearts and our minds together and we go forward, we will conquer.
So let us all arise and be proudly African.
Being an African is who I am right now.
I'm proudly African. I love Africa.
Wishing you all a very happy Africa Month.
One love.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
We make sure to be where news is happening,
both locally and globally. For the latest business news, stay with us.
From South Africa to the world, we've got all your latest sporting news.
Don't miss our weather updates every hour.
Stay tuned to News Today, Monday to Friday, from 3 to 5:30 p.m. here on SABC News.
Okay, let's learn more about this condition, ME/CFS. We've got in studio here, first up on my extreme left, Professor Girish Modi. Professor Modi is a specialist neurologist and head of the neurology department based at Wits University. And next to Professor Modi is Dr. Alison Bentley. Dr. Bentley is a sleep therapist based at the Donald Gordon Medical Center out here in Parktown. And in our Cape Town studios, we welcome Dr. Laura Chela, who is a homeopath and has special interest in treating patients with CFS. Laura, welcome to Health Talk from our studio in Cape Town.
Thank you very much.
All right, and of course, over here, Dr. Bentley and Prof. Modi, welcome to Health Talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Prof, let's start from the beginning and just clear out this whole issue of, terminology. Some years ago, there was talk of yuppie flu. Now you hear this ME, CFS. Please just tell us, what is this chronic fatigue syndrome and what is the correct terminology?
Yeah, I think the correct terminology is coming. It's the right one. I think chronic fatigue syndrome is the new correct terminology. I would say that you have to even dump the myalgic encephalomyelitis because we don't know. You see, encephalo is brain, myelitis is spinal cord. And so when you're saying myalgic, you're saying muscle, brain, spinal cord. You're implying there's a pathological substrate for this. So that's why I don't like that terminology.
Right.
I think the terminology chronic fatigue syndrome is the correct one because that's what it really is.
Yeah.
It's descriptive, it tells you what the condition is, and it's very appropriate to diagnosis. I think it was in the late 90s. I think I was still in the UK and the yuppie flu thing came up, right? And it was huge, and everyone had yuppie flu. And the reason, so it's an interesting, so the evolution and the history of this disease tells you a lot about it, or helps you understand a lot about it. So when that came out, yuppie is the group of young, upwardly mobile professionals or individuals. And so it seemed to hit that class of individual. The one who's hardworking, ambitious, running, never smelling the wood for the trees or never even knowing there's a bunch of roses out there, just working, and then crashing. And so the burnout concept came out. Are these people just burnt out? And then came the second thing, and that's where myalgic encephalomyelitis came as a term, because people began to think and say, this is a virally induced illness. And so the concept of post-viral syndrome or post-viral fatigue evolved. So we went from yuppie flu, post-viral syndrome, and that was mixed with myalgic encephalomyelitis. And the reason was there was a lot of muscle pain. There was this complete paralysis, so to speak. You were so tired you could barely walk, and they had patients. And I've seen some of these guys that are so immobilized by the fatigue that they lie in bed, cannot, like your insert said, can't even get up to, make a cup of tea, wash. Basic ablutions couldn't be done. So the whole thing was, is this a brain, spinal cord, muscle disease? And that's where the evolution started.
But how common is this condition? There were skeptics out there who even said that
then my last comment was going to be, and I remember being there and sort of the prominent neurologist at the time at the esteemed Queen Square Institute in London dismissed this disease completely, right? And the immunologist and the rheumatologist latched onto it. And the immunologist started looking. And the reason people dismissed it is every time they looked, and medicine, you're a doctor, if you don't see something pathological, we don't believe it exists, right? And there are obvious other examples. Migraine doesn't have a pathological substrate, but we know it exists. And so the same issue came up, that there were too many skeptics. The condition was considered a burnout. The condition seemed to only affect these young, upwardly mobile people. You didn't see it in laborers. You didn't really see it in the elderly. There was a specific group of young people, predominantly females, but sort of male-female ratio quite close, that got this. And it was all about young people not coping.
All right, we're going to come back and talk a little more about it, but let's cross over to Cape Town and speak to Dr. Chela. Laura, you're a homeopath, and from your perspective, let's start with terminology. What's your perspective? Do you call it CFS? Do you call it ME? How often do you see it?
I'm very much in agreement that it does create some confusion, the ME terminology, and that chronic fatigue syndrome does suit more the symptoms and can explain the disease better. It is a very debilitating disease, and as you've heard, many patients cannot get out of bed, and most cannot even come to see a practitioner. So I think the term chronic fatigue syndrome for me is applicable, and it's what I use in my practice.
All right, we'll get back just now. Let's talk about diagnosis. Clearly, it is a very difficult condition to diagnose because there's many other things that can mimic. Just now you mentioned the symptom being chronic fatigue or exhaustion, perhaps, you know.
So I think before you make such a diagnosis, you have to have an exhaustive list of exclusions, right? Well, now you've got to think of the conditions that could mimic it. So the neurological conditions that could mimic it, for instance, myasthenia gravis, where there is fatigue, a severe post-viral infection with myelin breakdown in the brain. Multiple sclerosis sufferers get fatigue. So you got to start thinking, before you say you have CFS, you really need to make sure none of those are in there. The other big problem with this condition is that depression can be just as debilitating. And depression is probably an integral part of CFS, right? And so you can get a patient who hasn't got CFS, if you want to call it a disease separately, and who suffers from severe, say, major depression. Fatigue is a big component of that.
All right. Let's bring in Dr. Bentley here. I mean, you're a sleep therapist, and we're told that sleep disorders could be one of the differential diagnoses, or that some people with CFS will have some sort of sleep, let's call it some problems with sleep, perhaps not the disorder. Your perspective?
So CFS does have, sleep is one of the characteristics of that, or poor sleep, and it's termed non-restorative sleep. So what that means is that generally people will sleep the hours, but wake up in the morning and go, I don't feel like I've slept, I don't feel refreshed, I don't feel well. And fatigue during the day can be a symptom of a sleep disorder as well. So one of the differentials that needs to occur when you're trying to unearth CFS, and it's one of those disorders that when we've cleared up, it can't be any of those other things, that's often what it is. So it's kind of the end point of a lot of investigation. So you need to exclude the true sleep disorders, so the sleep apneics, so the people who snore and stop breathing at night. They're going to wake up feeling awful. They're going to feel very fatigued during the day. Same thing with periodic limb movements, people who have epilepsy at night, people who don't sleep well. And there, the combination with depression, it's very close. So we know that if you have depression, you're going to have insomnia. If you have insomnia, there's a very high risk of you getting depression later on. So all of this, the sleep kind of component of CFS may be just a component of it, so this non-restorative sleep, and it may be that when we do a sleep study, for example, we find nothing there, but we find that the sleep is not great, and that it's just a component of CFS. But you do need to exclude a sleep disorder as being the prime reason for the fatigue.
But
that makes
how
sense.
often then, I mean, in the patients that you see coming to you for sleep disorders, how often does it occur to you that CFS could be a problem here?
Well, because they usually come to me with a clear sleep problem. So it's very unusual that I would get people coming to me with fatigue, because that's not my thing. They would come to me and say, my sleep is unrefreshing. I'm waking up in the morning and I don't feel refreshed. And so we would work on the sleep component. And when we get to a point where we go, you've had a sleep study, yes, your sleep is not great, so the sleep structure isn't good, the sleep stages aren't great, but there's no sleep apnea, there's no leg movements, there's no epilepsy, but you have this fatigue. Let's talk about this fatigue a little bit more.
Okay. I feel that, we just are starting to talk about the actual condition, but unfortunately we have to go for a quick commercial break. All right, when we come back, we continue discussion on CFS or ME. Please stay with us.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
saying that the former minister is now endorsing Ramaphosa as the next president. Campaign time, Prof?
Yeah.
So early.
Let's at least accept that people have a right to expressing themselves in terms of who they support.
But what is lacking very seriously is that there is no that leadership role that is played by the leadership to say we haven't opened succession and let us deal with those that are campaigning openly, because we haven't opened it as the leadership of the ANC.
What we need in this country is that we need a ruling party or a leading party to be able to engage with issues that affect the people.
Our people campaign openly. It weakens the organization. In fact, it makes the policies of the ANC even more popular.
Stay tuned to Media Monitor and catch on analysts unpacking top stories every Sunday from 9 a.m.
Welcome back. We are talking CFS-ME, or chronic fatigue syndrome. And with me in Johannesburg, we have Professor Girish Moody, specialist neurologist and head of Department of Neurology at Wits University. And in our Cape Town studio, Dr. Laura Chella, a homeopath who deals quite a lot with ME patients. And then we joined back in our Joburg studio by another special guest, Rita Viviers. Now, Rita is a sufferer of MECFS herself and is founder of the MECSF Foundation of South Africa. Welcome to Health Talk, Rita.
Thank you very much.
All right. We're going to come back to you just now. Prof, we didn't get a chance to talk about the typical clinical symptoms for
so one of the clear symptoms, and I think this is the most important, that differentiates it from all the other causes of fatigue, is the fatigue is persistent, it's unrelenting, it's there all the time. So it's like sometimes the sleep disturbances, the sleep apnea patients, they wake up tired, We've had a bad night, we wake up tired. But as the day goes by, you improve. These guys don't improve. So they are tired from 100 hours to 2400 hours, all the time. Even in sleep, they are tired. So it's a persistent fatigue. That I think is core to the condition. Yes, we do exclude all the other things just to be certain. For instance, myasthenia, we know it's fluctuating. This is not fluctuating. Then there's another core of symptoms that come that are unique to this condition. So a lot of people complain of memory loss, but this memory loss comes with what you call a fog in the brain. So it's not like me and you getting older and forgetting things. It's almost like you can't see through things. And it's very typical. The first time I heard it, I thought this patient's pulling me. He's putting me on, right? But there's an actual, and the word, it's completely clear, brain fog, right? And as you see more and more of these patients, you actually understand this. So they can't see things through. Then they get the non-specific symptoms, which you cannot pinpoint. The muscle pain, the joint pain, the pain in certain trigger points in the neck, in the lower back. They get dizziness, they get headaches. So that's where the neurologist comes in, because they come in with headaches. And the headaches are very tension type headaches, right? And then there are various other non-specific symptoms that would be related to the fact that they have this fatigue. So they may complain of impotence, they may complain of agitation, they may complain of anxiety, and they actually become more and more depressed, right? And then they develop also, like Alison was saying, the sleep disturbances. Right. So those are the key
typical
symptoms.
clinical course?
Okay, so that's an interesting one, and the general feeling is this burns out. It does burn out. I personally have not seen a person with chronic fatigue going on forever.
Okay.
I think we all intervene now. The days are gone where we dismiss the disease. We recognize, we know it's there, we know it's in existence. There's a lot of facilitation in the process, whether it's naturopathic, whether it's allopathic, or whether it's medical science. We all get together and we work these patients, and they do improve.
All right.
And
We're
they
supposed
get
to be
better.
talking causes and risk factors, understanding who's at risk. But before that, let's invite Rita here. And Rita, you founded this MECFS Foundation.
Yes.
Just tell us, we know that you suffer from the condition, but
Yes.
what motivated you to found, this?
Well, a few things. One is I've started a Facebook support group 4.5 years ago.
Yeah.
And from all the members that have joined, I realized there's such a dire need for one, medical practitioners to be able to diagnose, break the stigma, and then also a lot of us had to stop working, so there's a huge financial component. So we are trying to provide comprehensive support to them, get doctors on board who are willing to look at the latest research. And then we also want to establish a care facility for ME people. I just would like to, if I'm allowed to, make a few comments about previous speakers.
Yeah.
It is definitely not burnout. There's a lot of research done overseas. One example is at Stanford University. There's an Open Medicine Foundation, and they've done a lot of research. And it looks like the mitochondria might be involved. They've done brain studies. There's definitely a difference in temperatures. And the cognitive impairment is really bad. I've lost a lot of my memory, short-term and long-term. And then also there's been autopsies of bodies, people who've died of ME. And it clearly showed inflammation of the brain and the spinal cord. So that is why we are so persistent to call it MECFS at the moment. Yes, there's a big debate in terms of what is the right term, but ME is definitely one of them.
Just by the way, the CDC, I mean, what terminology do they use for the condition?
CFS.
CFS.
The Canadian.
No, the Center for Diseases Control.
Oh, yeah.
So the official name we can take is CFS for now.
No, it varies per country.
Yeah.
If you speak to an Australian and you mention the word CFS, I've asked for help on my foundation Facebook page, and they said, as long as you've got the word or the acronym CFS in your foundation name, we will not help you. And then also, not all people with ME get depression. Some do, yes, because if you are in bed for many years, of course you will.
Yeah.
Improvement, yes, there are symptomatic treatments, but if you really have what they call ME, CFS, chances of improvement are not well. Because there's not a biomarker yet, they are working on getting a biomarker to diagnose the illness.
Okay. Prof, I'm going to ask you for your comments, but before that, let me just cross over to Cape Town and speak to Laura. Laura, we're talking briefly causes and risk factors. And I'm asking this from your treatment perspective. What do you see as the typical causes for the condition?
Well, as you know, there's very little known in terms of direct causes, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
So a lot of my patients come to me and they say to me, since I had this infection, since I had a terrible case of Epstein-Barr virus, or patients say to me, since the birth of my child, I've developed this chronic fatigue. Other patients will come and say to me, since I experienced a specific trauma, whether it would be physical or emotional, they noticed a decline, a rapid decline in their health and the development of symptoms. And then eventually, down the line, they get diagnosed with CFS.
Okay, very interesting. Two things. Firstly, a comment if you want to...
I must say, I didn't say it's burnout. It was called that. So that's the evolution of the disease. Okay. So I agree with almost everything you've said. I think it's an interesting time at the moment where the disease has become recognized.
Yes.
Okay, so that's crucial. It's been the hardest condition for medical practitioners to accept as a disease.
Well, we must accept not many medical practitioners out there, are confident enough to make the diagnosis in the first place.
So it's a very difficult one.
Yeah.
And your biggest issue is we have no biomarker.
Yes.
So whilst there is a lot of study coming out now on mitochondria in CFS, there have been studies on T cells, there have been studies on inflammation in muscles, there have been studies on inflammation in brain, spinal cord. They haven't been consistent. So you can't use any specific marker. So, I mean, there was a chap I knew who was biopsying every patient and saying they have CFS. And then he got discredited. So you have to be careful. There isn't a blood test. There isn't an image or a scan test. There is nothing. So it becomes more and more difficult. But medicine has now evolved to accept it as an illness, which is a big breakthrough.
And we don't know what the cause is.
As a physical illness, for which we don't have a cause. Risk factors, that's why I told you, as it evolved, it was called post-viral, because there was this flood of Epstein-Barr virus patients who developed it. And we do know, for instance, if you have hepatitis, you will have 6 months of fatigue.
All right. Very interesting discussion. Now, how exactly does this impact on someone's life? We're going to know that after the break. Please stay with us.
Rights and recourse tackles constitutional issues.
When South Africa became a constitutional democracy, we had a fairly sound legal system in place requiring the constitution to guide the direction in which it must go and the way in which it must be refashioned.
The Justice Ministry, the custodian of human rights.
We actually have a plan to come up with a comprehensive review of our human rights instrument.
Advocates dealing with evidence.
Sometimes you have to use a crook to catch a crook. So we expected that credibility would really be taken to task. You try and consult your witnesses and prepare them as best as you can.
Hashtag Rights with Dubila Matez on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
Phones, cloud systems and robots have taken over a lot of what used to be done manually.
Our accounting system is actually based on the cloud.
Google nowadays can tell you where you parked your car.
And Africa's entrepreneurs are using technology to create.
With Pocket Masipala, you can basically do all the services that you would do at the municipality physically by going there, but you can now do them on the mobile app.
Join me, Spumelele Zondi, on Sundays at 9 p.m. on SABC News.
The disease ME can be triggered by an infection or series of infections, surgery, another illness, an accident, or any other physical or emotional stressors. Meet Lee Ann Evans, an ME sufferer who was a podiatric doctor. Miss Evans' ME began the moment she came out of anesthetic. After seeing about 10 different GPs, she finally got a conclusive diagnosis many years later.
I found out quite a long time after I got sick. It's a very difficult illness to diagnose, but I had gone in for an operation, and once I'd come out of surgery, it required general anesthetic. I just never felt the same again, and I realized that something was wrong. And then started the search. Went to several different doctors, and it took years. It took absolute years, and many different types of doctors, different specialists.
There is no single universal approved treatment because ME patients' symptoms vary over time. Specialists often suggest treatments that are highly personalized and change treatment protocols frequently.
Some of the doctors that I saw suggested different types of supplements. When we say therapeutic doses, you have to take them at very high dosages. So if a normal supplement bottle tells you to take 1 twice a day, we'd have to take 4 3 times a day, for example. So I've tried over the years very, very many different supplements. Some I could handle, some I couldn't handle. Some doctors tried to put me onto medications like antidepressants. They very often put you onto antidepressants not because it's a depression illness, but because it's meant to increase your energy levels.
Now at the age of 41, she has lost her career. She's gone from being a highly functioning, busy medical professional to living with some very restrictive boundaries with the support of her husband.
I've got a wonderful, supportive husband. I think without him, I don't know where I'd be. I wake up in the morning and you basically can tell what kind of a day it's going to be as you open your eyes, because some mornings you wake up and you just think, I just can't. I just can't today. Usually I can tell that when I get into the shower, as I lift my hands to try and wash my hair and it doesn't work, I think, okay, it's not going to happen. And I got to get back into bed.
One of the most devastating symptoms of ME is brain inflammation. But for Leanne, it is fatigue.
The symptoms vary at different stages of the illness. I think for most of us, this crushing fatigue, it's not like a tiredness that you can recover from if you go and have a nap. It's you wake up tired. All the cells in your body are tired. It's exhausting to stand up. It's exhausting to breathe.
She has started adopting to a new identity and found a slower pace of life. One of her wishes is for people to get more educated about chronic fatigue.
I'd love more education. I'd love the government to be able to get involved to try and give some of the sufferers some kind of assistance, financial assistance. Because like in my case, I'm very fortunate that I've got a husband to look after me. But if I didn't, I mean, I can't work anymore. Things have been ripped out of my life, and how would I survive? And there are very many patients that are in that predicament. You know, they sit from day to day not managing to have any food because they aren't able to fend for themselves anymore. So I think that's why we're trying to create awareness, because everybody needs to come on board and people need desperate help.
All right, we know that, at least we've heard, that this can be a debilitating condition. And here to tell us about, how that has impacted her own personal life is Rita Vivius, who is a sufferer of the condition, of course, and founder of the MECFS Foundation. Of course, we still have in studio in Johannesburg, Prof. Girish Modi, specialist neurologist and head of department of neurology at Wits University, and of course in our Cape Town studio, Dr. Laura Chella, who's a homeopath based in Cape Town. Let's come back to you and tell us about your personal story. How long have you lived with this condition?
It's been 14 years. Mine started after a major operation that I had. And I just realized I couldn't get my stamina back. And then the virus has started. But I've had glandular fever as a child. And I got more and more weak. But for a few years I could still cope. I was diagnosed in 2004. The impact is really, really severe. You have to stop working. Well, I had to stop. There's a small amount of people who can still work, but they basically push through and then they crash weekends, so they are actually making themselves more ill. So because I cannot work, it had a major impact on our finances, you can imagine. It's also very isolating. I work from home, well, call it work, because it's via the internet. Thank you so much for the internet, because you realize you're not the only one. So it's very isolating. And in a sense, I've lost my identity. I was known as somebody with a very good brain, and I've lost a lot of that capability. So at a stage, I really had an inferior complex about that, until I learned to say, it's okay, I just don't know. And then, your children, my one daughter's 24, so she's doing her own thing. But the youngest, she has sport events. If it's far, I cannot go. I can't drive myself far. I have to lie at the back of the car. Even here, I had to Uber, and I lied at the back of the car. And what I do is I function for 3 hours and then I sleep for about 1.5 to 2. And then that goes on and on throughout the day. Because otherwise I just cannot function. You know, you become confused, your brain is not working, muscle pain starts. So it really has a very, very huge impact on my daily life.
And from the foundation's perspective, I mean, you obviously interact with other sufferers
Yes.
of the
With the
condition.
Facebook support group, I came across a lot of people. And now we were very fortunate to be on a big investigative program recently. And that video went viral. It stands on 68,000 views. And even people like Ron Davis's colleagues are now using that video to educate their fellow colleagues, because they say that's the first time that somebody has shown this is a real physical illness and that there is hope. There's a lot of research being done. Ron Davis' son has it.
So who's Ron Davis?
He is a scientist at Stanford. He was very much part of the Human Genome Project. And when his son when he got ill, he was a photographer. And he went to 20, 30 doctors and was told it's all in your head. And, you know, if you only do a few blood tests, they all come back positive. Because that's the thing.
Okay.
So now with nanotechnology, Davis, they are doing very specific tests. I think they do like 700 blood tests. And then you realize these people are very seriously ill.
So in a nutshell, you do have the condition, but you are able to cope with general life activities, so to
Not really, because I can only work from home and only for those 2-3 hours. And then, you know, you sleep and you have to make a choice. Can you do a little bit of computer work, or are you going to go and watch your daughter hockey at her school, which is close?
Prof, you know, coming back to that, she mentioned something about after the operation and then the viral illness. Now, perhaps coming back to, you know, the clinical course, are there periods where the condition is latent and you know, it resurfaces?
I mean, relapsing,
Yeah.
or sort of remitting and relapsing.
Kind of,
Yeah,
yeah.
it can do that.
Yeah.
So there are patients, and I've seen them. I used to think there's a burnout period of, it burns out, not burnout period, for about 2 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen patients battling.
Yeah.
I had one patient who was very prominent psychologist, and he went from the condition that you have now to complete paralysis over 6 months, lay in bed for almost 6 months, and then he started improving, and then he went back to his department and he's running his department. So there is that cycle,
Yeah.
and they can. And so if it does turn out to be an aberrant immune disease, then it would confirm that this is something like MS or something like myasthenia, where it can be remitting and relapsing.
You just reminded me of something. There's also this concept of immune dysfunction syndrome.
Yeah.
Any relevance to this condition?
It could be. It could be.
Yeah,
You
they
can't
get that,
say
eh?
you can't say that CFS is immune dysfunction, because like you are, they're also looking at mitochondrial function, which is completely different to immune systems. But at one stage, because of this whole viral background and people having histories and records of glandular fever as a big thing, immune dysfunction became an important part of CFS. But is CFS and immune dysfunction syndrome the same thing? No.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about, you know, the from your perspective of treating, you know, these patients, what sort of different levels of severity and the impact you've noticed.
Yeah.
But let me put the same question through to Dr. Laura Chella. Dr. Chella, from the patients that you see, what are the different grades of severity and what sort of impact do you see?
I see quite a variety of grades of severity. I have patients that are completely bedbound, that cannot get up for weeks, and then they have a period where they feel a bit better, they can get into a wheelchair, they can go and see a psychologist, they can have an appointment with a practitioner. And then I have patients who function slightly better, where they can get up every day, They can do a little bit of work, some volunteer. Most don't hold down a regular job. Some are able to get up to make food for their families or take their children to and from school and then have to rest. I think it varies from patient to patient. And in my experience, every patient is slightly different.
Yeah. Prof, I'm sure you see almost the same thing. Huh?
Same thing.
Yeah.
No, same thing. The spectrum is wide. You can get the guys who come in and they've got their fatigue, but they're functioning. So, I mean, I've seen business executives who probably have this condition. They come for pain usually, those guys. And it's often the headache, the pain, the dizzy, the memory patient, where the fatigue is not overwhelming. They are mobile, active, and they're still functional. And then you get the other extreme where the fatigue is so overwhelming, they're non-functional. So there's a wide spectrum.
Yeah. The other relevant question, I mean, you say you've had this condition for 14 years. And there was a question around, what is the long-term prognosis for the condition? Yes, we know that there's different grades of severity. But what is the longest, I mean, do people ever get to a point where, they're completely okay?
In my experience and what I've seen here and we are also connected with overseas communities, the recovery rate is very low. It's about 10%. There are symptomatic treatments that can build you up in certain areas. You can manage your pain. You can work on the viruses and a bit on the energy. We've seen people who've been ill for 40 years. 40 years.
It's a long time.
It's a very long time. It's just, I mean, I've been ill for 14 years, and the best that I could have done was the day that I accepted this is my new life. I had to grieve my old life. It will not be the same. If there comes a cure, I'm first in the queue. But if it doesn't happen, at least we have communities. And also what has happened globally, people have come together, ME carers, ME patients. And on the 12th of May, it was ME Awareness Day, together with #MillionsMissing. And that is because they think there are about 20 million people worldwide, from which 90% haven't been diagnosed. So the Millions Missing that we do, which comes from America, is a big movement globally, 27 countries about participating, to pay tribute to the millions of people who are missing out on school because kids can get it, children can get it, men can get it. It doesn't discriminate between any race, age, socioeconomic class. Yes, more women, but definitely men as well.
Very interesting. So, how do we treat this condition? Is it treatable? Well, we'll answer that after the break. Please stay with us.
About that trending life, the looking good and all that slayage? Well, fear not, because Trends has all the fashion do's and don'ts for you to stay on point this upcoming season.
This film will be an immersive spectacle. You got Kong that's 100 feet tall.
It tells this incredible story of man versus nature.
The iconic stage production by Mbongeni Ngema is back with a bang.
Sarafina is a classic South African production.
I always choose to align myself with brands that I just love. Because when you love something, it doesn't become work.
Luxury is not built overnight, but it's an experience that comes with time.
Catch up with all the trends on Trends Saturdays at 12.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, we're talking chronic fatigue syndrome, and I have my guests in our Johannesburg studio. On my extreme left is Dr. Alison Bentley, a sleep therapist based at the Donald Gordon Medical Center. And then next to her is Professor Girish Modi, a specialist neurologist and head of Department of Neurology at Wits University. And of course, Rita Viviers, a sufferer of MECFS and founder of MECFS Foundation of South Africa. And we'll go straight to our Cape Town studio and speak to Dr. Laura Chela, a homeopath who's in practice in Cape Town. Let's start talking treatment now, Chela, from your homeopathic perspective. We know that obviously treatment of this condition is a multidisciplinary team, and of course you play a part as well. Can you just give us a sense of what you do with your patients?
Yes, firstly I'd like to agree with you. It is definitely a multidisciplinary team that is required to treat this. There isn't currently a cure, even from my perspective. I think we need to look at the patients in totality. We need to look at what's happening immunologically. We need to look at what's going on in the gut with inflammation. There is a recent study from the University of Columbia that is starting to look at gut dysbiosis and the connection with ME and CFS patients. So we need to start looking at all of these studies and incorporating them in order to treat these patients. So from my perspective, I treat the patient as a whole, including gut treatment and then specific organ treatments when looking at the ability of the patient to detoxify. The other thing that is very important is to look at any deficiencies. So like we've said before, to rule out any illnesses, we also need to look at deficiencies like iron deficiencies. We need to look at vitamin deficiencies like vitamin D, vitamin B, and so on. Another form of treatment that we do obviously is the homeopathic treatment, and that we take the patient in totality and find out what is unique about that patient with their symptomatology and use that to guide us in the remedy selection. And for me personally, another very important aspect with my patients is that they need psychological support and treatment. Even though I don't necessarily believe that it comes from depression, a lot of patients that I see who have been suffering for a long time, and understandably so, can develop depression or anxiety. And these all need to be managed together.
Final question to you. How difficult or how easy do you find treating these patients?
It is not very easy to treat these patients. As you've heard, patients go through crashes. So you get amelioration and your patient starts to improve, and then there's a stress. So whether it's a viral infection or an emotional stress or something happens and it seems to tip the patient and the patient has another crash. You then have to support the patient through the crash, and then sometimes it's not exactly starting from zero, but sometimes you've got to go a bit backwards, repeat some of your treatment and then keep going forward. But ultimately what you want to try and aim for, or what I try and aim for, is that the crashes last for a shorter period of time, and that the time between the crashes is longer.
All right. Okay, let's come back to Joburg, and let's start with you now, Prof. Of course, we spoke earlier about the principles of treatment, that obviously it's a multidisciplinary team that's involved. From your perspective now, can you just comment on the principles of treatment?
I must say she sort of dealt with it very well. You need to understand that they are the cycles.
Right.
You need to know they're going to crash. You need to know they're going to be well for a while. When they're well, you let them be happy. And when they're unhappy, you make them happy again. And your modalities of treatment vary from patient to patient. Mm-hmm. I think the way forward for all patients is to try and ameliorate that fatigue. If you can get the fatigue to improve, and there are ways of doing that, you suddenly get that little relief. And so we treat the pain, and it's symptomatic, it's very symptomatic. So we treat the pain, we have medicines for that, we have procedures for that. We treat the memory disturbances or the loss of memory, and we try and support that. We try and improve the brain fog, and we try and improve the fatigue. And most of the support is multidisciplinary. So there will be pharmacological treatment, there will be psychological treatment, there will be, the support groups are very important, very important. They play a massive role. And so we must commend you for actually starting it. Because when there's nothing, you feel quite lonely and isolated. And to be able to talk to it is part of that whole psychological thing. So you can't say there's one size fits all. Right. There is no, when you have any condition, and I mean, I can even think of migraine as an analogy, where you don't have a biological marker, you're not going to have a specific biological treatment. It's that simple. So
and the treatment outcomes generally?
Not bad. Look, I agree that there may or may not be a cure. We don't, a complete remission. We don't know that for sure. We don't know how long patients can go on for, because not all of them have a 40-year course, not all of them have a 5-year course, they vary so much. But I would say that the kinds of supportive treatments that there are out there at the moment for this are improving the condition, are improving the health of the patients. It's better than we've had. And I think that's important.
Rita, I'm going to come back to you and ask you about that important aspect of support. But let's understand from Dr. Bentley. Clearly, some of these patients would have problems with sleep, and that's how they would land with you. Please just give us a sense of how you deal with these sleep disorders or sleep problems.
Okay. I think it's important, and it's been said by everybody, is that basically you might have an underlying chronic fatigue syndrome, but you might have other disorders on top of that need to be managed. And if you don't manage the depression, if you don't manage the insomnia, if you don't manage any other kind of sleep disorder, for example, you're never going to get down to what the lowest level of symptomatology that those patients might have. So for the sleep, the problem we have with all patients who have fatigue from any other cause is that they tend to spend a lot of time in bed during the day. And when they spend time in bed, they tend to nap. And if they sleep during the day, very often that disturbs their sleep at night. So one of the factors that we know that improves your sleep is if you stay awake for a long period of time. So the longer you stay awake, the better you are able to fall asleep, the better sleep you're going to have during the night. Whereas if you nap during the day, often, even though you might feel as though it's relieving your symptoms, you're not going to sleep well at night. And so it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle that you have this sleep that's kind of a 24-hour sleep, and the patients tend to focus on the sleep at night. And so you do need to do what we call sleep hygiene, and that is look after your sleep. It's designed to be at night, not all the way through the day. So that's the one thing you can do. Secondly, if there are any symptoms that you have of an actual sleep disorder, then please let's manage those, because if we manage those, you will feel better.
All right. Before we run out of time, let me give you an opportunity to tell us about the support that you give, and perhaps just add lifestyle issues as well as part of it.
I'll do that now. I just want to make one or two comments, if that's okay. The reason that ME patients sleep during the day is that they literally cannot stay awake. They are that ill. It's not a choice, not at all.
Right.
The biggest criteria differentiator at the moment is what we call PEM, post-exertion malaise. And even for me, this interview, coming here, doing the interview, is going to lead to post-exertion malaise, which is an increase in my symptoms. I don't go through cycles. I'm always, I do not have good days in the sense of I don't have to do my 3 times rest. I have worse days. Okay. In terms of support, when I started the support group, one thing was I'm so happy to find somebody, because I thought I was the only one. I thought I was mad. And then I also realized how many people have lost their jobs because you can no longer work, had to sell their houses, move in with their family, and are living in poverty. And that is one thing the foundation wants to do, is to help those people get into doctors and get symptomatic treatment. Support is crucial, absolutely crucial.
Right. Well, Rita Vivius, founder of MECFS Foundation of South Africa. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And of course, Prof. Girish Modi, neurologist, head of neurology at Wits University. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. Dr. Alison Bentley, sleep therapist at Donald Gordon Medical Center. Thank you so much for your time. All right, folks, that's all we have for you today. And remember, please join us again next week, same time on SABC. And please just keep those comments coming through our Facebook page. And I'm Dr. Solomon Down. Thank you so much for watching. Please do take care.